would be great.
Here we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Dana Harvey. I am a psychedelics and microdosing facilitator, educator, and community builder. I do all of those things under my own brand, which is the Flourish Academy. I also facilitate for and am head of communications and partnerships for an organization called Gathering Groups. I am a community leader for the Flying Sage, a course educator for Psilocybin San Francisco, and founder of the Vancouver Women in Psychedelics meetup group. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really honored to be here with this amazing group of people and with this amazing lineup. I'm honored to be coming to you today from the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. And before I begin, I just want to say that some of the terminology I'm going to be using can be sensitive for some people. So as much as possible, while I'm talking, when I reference men and women, I'm going to be talking about gender identity. Male and female is biological sex, and feminine and masculine will refer to characteristics and tendencies that we all embody, but which have sort of stereotypical attributes, like the feminine being receptive, fluid, nurturing being, with the masculine being more productive, action and goal-oriented, and logic-based. I'm really, really passionate about including, supporting, elevating, and celebrating women in general in our society, and particularly in business, and particularly in the psychedelic space. A number of esteemed medicine women and channelers, a number of them have told me that the reason why is that it's a mission that I have from a past life that I need to carry out in this life. And considering it, how incredibly passionate I am about this, and how even when I kind of like try to step away from it, it comes back to me. I have to say there is some credence to that for sure. I also think it's in my bloodline, coming from a lineage of strong, pioneering Celtic women who bravely have broken gender barriers and stereotypes, and literally and figuratively have gone where no women have previously gone. So I just want to take a moment to honor my ancestors. And I thought I'd just start by sharing some of my backstory to provide some context as to why I'm so passionate about uplifting women. So let's start in my university days, where I studied communications with a minor in Eastern philosophies and religions. I graduated, I started working in global trade development for the Canadian government. I worked for a few years, and then I went on to study what was the equivalent of a master's in Asian business, which was sponsored by the Canadian government to kind of cultivate their next generation of Asian specialists for Canada. One component of the program was that you had to study one of the Asian languages. I was particularly interested in Southeast Asia, so I chose to study what was apparently the hardest language, which was Thai. Another component was that I had to complete a year working and living in an Asian country, and to write a final thesis based on some aspect of that experience. I ended up being hired by Nortel, which many of you looking around the room may not remember. Nortel kind of ages me, but at the time it was the Canadian telecom infrastructure developer and manufacturer. So they hired me to live and work in Bangkok with the territory of Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar, developing the markets for next generation wireless data, kind of leapfrogging the technology that was in place in North America and in Europe. So before I even started working there, the Canadian government sponsored me to have 6 full weeks of full language immersion in northern Thailand. So by the time I got to working in Bangkok, I could pretty fluently read, write, and speak Thai. So I was able to do business in the Thai language, but even more importantly for me, I was able to really speak to Thai people and to understand their culture, and to get kind of behind the English backbones that were there. And I ended up writing my thesis on the contrast between women in top management positions in Canada and North America, in contrast to women in top management positions in Thailand and in Southeast Asia. I was fascinated by the fact that despite our generalized kind of preconceived notion that these Asian countries are very male dominated, that women are really submissive and passive, there was in fact a higher percentage of women in top management positions there than there were in Canada. So in many cases, that was a result of familial lines, so businesses being carried down through families. But what struck me was how differently women conducted themselves and thought of themselves in business than what I had seen and what had been role modeled to me in Canada. So before I went to Asia, I'd been mentored by a few women in business. And across the board, the advice that they gave me was, Dana, you need to go out and buy yourself a pantsuit, ditch the skirts, ditch the dresses, get a suit jacket with the biggest shoulder pads you can get, which also dates me, and brush up on your sports terminology. If you want to succeed in business, you need to understand this is a man's world and you need to learn how to play by the man's rules. In contrast, the women who mentored me in business in Asia had no concept of belittling themselves or changing their clothing or their characteristics or themselves to adapt to men's expectations. They embraced their femininity. They were women doing business, and they were successful just being who they were. I spent a good number of my formative business years under the mentorship of these women, these powerful, authentic women leaders. And I found that when I returned back to Canada, I approached business, particularly in the extremely male-dominated world of high technology, with a different attitude and a quiet confidence that I didn't see in many of my women counterparts and peers. And that's when I started mentoring and coaching women in business, in confidence, in mindset, and in transitions. And as I worked my way up the leadership ladder in technology, where there weren't many other women to be seen, it came to feel like a heartfelt responsibility to mentor and to nurture women as visible, discriminated against minorities in this space. I ended up starting an organization called Future Women. It was an event-based organization that brought together women, people of all genders who were interested in supporting gender diversity and equity and elevating women, particularly in the space of technology. I also founded a nonprofit organization called the Women's Collaborative Hub, which was a platform for women to share their unique gifts. And we focused specifically on elevating and celebrating these unsung women heroes in our communities. So, you know, the teachers, the first responders, the super moms, the caregivers who really tie our communities together and make our communities thrive, but they're not very often recognized or celebrated in any way. And that organization also ended up supporting a community of widows and their children in Zimbabwe. Eventually, my corporate career saw me transition into the space of psychedelics and plant medicine, where I was recruited to be CCO and head of investor relations for one of the publicly traded companies. It made sense to be recruited there, as over the years I developed a niche in communications leadership for emerging technologies and new industries. And as psychedelics re-emerged in the Western world, and they were essentially industrialized, this is what they were positioned for. So right from the beginning in that role, I was surprised and disappointed to note was that there was the same overemphasis of masculine characteristics and men in leadership as in the entrenched world of technology. I thought it might be different because this was a new industry where we could have the chance to do things differently. And also in reflection of women's history with plant medicine, and also what I find to be the innately feminine characteristics of plant medicines themselves. So for a number of reasons that I won't get into right now, except to say at a high level, the mushrooms made me do it. I left my corporate career. I decided to step away and I resigned from my position. I dove headfirst into training, educating myself, being mentored, having the opportunity to apprentice, to learn how to serve medicine and how to combine my mentoring and coaching skills with plant medicine to support people at a really heartfelt level and to help them to flourish, thus the Flourish Academy. I eventually established Vancouver Women in Psychedelics, a meetup group that expanded into the global organization Sisters in Psychedelics, which hosted in 2022 the successful Sisters in Psychedelics Summit, with a mission to include, elevate, and celebrate women's perspectives and voices in the psychedelic space. So with 150 people in person and live streamed to thousands around the world, the summit, which was open to all genders, uniquely featured all women speakers and presenters, 43 of them, in fact. And this was in direct response to a survey we had done of the psychedelic conferences around the world in the preceding years that showed us that there was an average ratio of 8-to-1 men to female presenters. These days, I'm really passionate about facilitating particularly women's only groups for gathering groups, which, if you haven't heard of gathering groups, they offer a really unique two-eyed seeing model of community or small group-based plant medicine work that involves a full 8 weeks of preparation and a minimum of 4 weeks integration wrapped around 2-night mushroom ceremony retreat. And I'm passionate about leading groups, particularly women, again, through microdosing for transformation protocols. And I continue to elevate and celebrate women's perspectives and voices as I host guest speakers in the Flourish Academy's weekly educational programming. So why do I feel that the mission to include, elevate, and celebrate women in this space is so important? Let's just start with the fact that women are the original medicine keepers. In the hunter-gatherer days, for all of our Indigenous people, men were the hunters, women were at home nurturing their families and community while they discovered and explored and experimented with plants, finding out which ones were good for food, for nutrition, and for medicine, for wound care, for physical ailments, for labor and delivery, and for spirituality. And that knowledge was carried down through the matriarchal lines. Back in ancient Greece and Europe, or Greece and Egypt, at the Temple of Ulysses, where up to 5,000 people of all genders and classes would pilgrimage and journey together, women would prepare and serve the psychedelic mixture to the people. What's newly been uncovered in the last 5 years or so shows that in early Christianity, psychedelic wine was used for the Eucharist to induce divine encounters with God. And this wine was prepared and served by women priests for centuries. It wasn't until 383 AD that the Roman Emperor Theodosius, who was the founder of patriarchy in Christian tradition, outlawed this practice. He made it clear that the distinction that if women were leading ceremony, it was pagan, and if men were leading ceremony, it was Christian. Later in Western Christian Europe, the church was threatened by women who were medicine keepers or herbalists, calling them witches. And it's documented that over the course of about 1,500 years, up to 60,000 of us were hung or burned alive because of our connection to the plants. And this was justified by the Pope. And since the Middle Ages, women traditionally used the ergot fungus for a number of reproductive health issues, including to stop hemorrhaging after birth. And that is, in fact, what piqued Albert Hofmann's interest in ergot, which he went on to synthesize into LSD. So as evidenced, women were the original medicine keepers. And we have a historic and rightful place to be leaders in this newly reinvigorated and now industrialized space. In the essence of time, I'm going to skip over some of the more recent Western history and the generally unreported influence of medicine women like Maria Sabina, and the contributions of women like Valentina Wasson, Mabel Lujan, Mary Bernard, and others, so that we can cast our eyes briefly on what's happening in the space today. Where are women's perspectives and voices and contributions being seen, heard, and considered? I've already talked a bit about the imbalance in leadership and the prioritizing of men's perspectives and contributions as speakers and presenters. And this is across the ecosystem, from business to science, research, investment, and funding. And the imbalance is reflected in a number of ways. First of all, there's a lack of inclusion of women in clinical trials. The Journal of Pharmacology recently noted that only 24% of participants in MDMA trials have been women, and only 29% have been women in psilocybin trials. Secondly, there's a lack of differentiation between male and female experiences in clinical trials. And this is noted in cases such as the Johns Hopkins smoking cessation trial, where there was no differentiation between male and females, even though we know that male and female bodies have different nicotine receptors that may affect their challenges to quitting. Thirdly, there is a huge lack of research around women's specific conditions like PMS, PMDD, women's sexual dysfunction, endometriosis, menstrual migraine, perimenopause, menopause. And these are all generally conditions that logically make sense that psychedelics could be really helpful with. If you look at, just even looking at the interplay between estrogen and serotonin. On that note, I just have to say, Mums on Mushrooms has recently launched a citizen science study, along with Pam Crisco and Quantified Citizen, that is looking at psychedelics for PMDD. So if you or anyone you know is suffering from PMDD, please look up Mums on Mushrooms. I'm so happy to see that there is some progress in this area. And fourthly, I believe that the imbalance is reflected in the medicalized, masculinized protocols being embraced and advanced for serving psychedelic medicines. For decades, there have been many long-term underground medicine women serving medicine in traditional, ceremonial, often communal, divinely feminine ways. And here I would refer you to a book called Swimming in the Sacred by Rachel Harris, which is a great source for that. Rarely are we made aware of these women or their practices, nor are their ways of serving medicine being modeled or revered in the emerging psychedelic industry. Again, I find this interesting because I consider plant medicines, the way they work in themselves, to be divinely feminine in fluid, nonlinear, nurturing, presencing ways. So where do all these reflections lead us? I think, number one, more women are needed in leadership in the psychedelic space. And we need to uplift, elevate, and celebrate the ones who are. Secondly, more research is needed around psychedelics for female-specific conditions, especially those ones that can logically be supported by psychedelics. Third, more females need to be included in clinical trials. And fourth, gender-specific experiences need to be considered in clinical trials. And fifthly, women's traditional and inherently feminine approaches to serving medicine should be considered and adopted as standardized protocols are being developed in the psychedelic space. So in conclusion, I just want to take a moment to recognize and honor all the women who have come before us in this space. Those who have contributed in any number of ways, those who have taken great personal risks, those who have bravely paved the way to where we are today. We have further to go, but for the sake of those before us and for the sake of those to come, let's collectively uplift women to our historic and rightful place as leaders in the world of plant medicine and psychedelics. Thank you so much. That's it from me.